Let's look at Titus 1, beginning in verse 5. For this reason I left you in Crete, that you would set in order what remains and appoint elders in every city as I directed you. Namely, if any man is above reproach, the husband of one wife, having children who believe, not accused of dissipation or rebellion, and then Paul goes on to list other characteristics consistent with a Christian leader. Now, those additional characteristics are definitely worth pursuing, but there's only one of these attributes that's specific to a man, and that must be the focus of our time. At a glance, it may appear that there are two masculine-specific qualifiers. Namely, if any man is above reproach, and then later, the husband of only one wife. However, when you read the original Greek, you will find that the first clause is non-gendered. We've added the word man in English in some translations to make it read more naturally. But a better rendering would be, if any is above reproach. KJV actually does a better job with this, saying, if any be blameless. So when read as it was written, these attributes could just as easily apply to a man or a woman. So also true with all of the other characteristics of an elder, except for the phrase, the husband of one wife. Now, I think that there are multiple ways to interpret that directive. Furthermore, I'm not sure that this passage by itself can tell you which of these interpretations is more correct. In order to find the best meaning, we probably need to look at the entire arc of Scripture, but let's start with the specifics. The husband of one wife. Now, one way to interpret this is that an elder must be a man married to a woman in order to qualify for appointment. This would exclude a man who was never married. It would exclude a widower. It would even exclude a man who was widowed after appointment to eldership. So if you're an elder and your wife dies, then you become immediately disqualified. It would exclude a divorcee, regardless of cause, regardless of whether that divorce occurred before you even knew or accepted Christ. This is a very narrow interpretation. Another possible interpretation is that an elder must be the kind of person who is committed in marriage. In other words, Paul didn't want Titus to appoint philanderers, unfaithful, adulterous men. That is inconsistent with the character of a Christian leader. Rather, Titus was to find those who were committed, men of their word, people who honored their commitments. The corollary to this is found in the next phrase, having children who believe. Now, does that mean that an elder must have children? Can someone who is infertile be an elder? Would one be disqualified from eldership if their children died young, before coming to an age of belief? Or does it mean that if you happen to have children, your children should be believers also? And at what point is the belief of a child still credited to or held against their parents? So we see one interpretation treats this as a checklist of qualifications, while another interpretation treats this more as an example of the types and characteristics that we should seek in those who are appointed to lead. With either interpretation, we have to recognize that it still specifically says the husband of one wife, the husband. Now, why would Paul use specifically masculine language if this was even possibly meant to include both men and women? Even if women as elders was a remote possibility for the distant future, why would Paul use language that seems to disqualify women from service? Why wouldn't he immediately flip it around and say the husband of one wife or the wife of one husband? I believe that context is key. Not the scriptural context in this case, but the cultural context. Within this culture, there was at least some acceptance of polygamous men, but there was no tolerance of polygamous women. So a man may marry many wives, but the wife can have only one husband. No other practice was tolerated, even within a society that was accepting of polygamy. Now, we certainly do not accept polygamy in our culture, but even in Crete, it was unthinkable that a wife would have more than one husband. So Paul may have thought it both wise and necessary to stipulate that a man should not have more than one wife. But there was just no earthly reason to state the converse, the opposite. It would have been a waste of parchment. So now we have to interpret this passage. Did Paul write husband of one wife because he couldn't imagine a woman as elder? Or did he write husband of one wife because he couldn't imagine a woman with more than one husband? That's a pretty big difference. And either one is plausible. So maybe we should continue this discussion as we turn to 1 Timothy 3 in the next video. Until then,